I watched my stepsister, Melissa, adjust the flowing silk sleeves of what should have been my wedding dress, her reflection beaming in the boutique's ornate mirror. The dress I had spent 3 years designing, the centerpiece of my senior fashion collection, the creation that was supposed to launch my career. She had no idea that every delicate bead, every carefully placed seam, every seemingly perfect detail was a carefully orchestrated trap, one I had set using knowledge from a life I had already lived once before. "It's absolutely perfect," she gushed to our mother, who stood behind her with tears of pride in her eyes. The same tears she had never shed for me, not even at my funeral in my previous life. "I can't believe how talented I am. This is definitely going to win the Parsons design competition." I forced my face into a mask of defeated resignation, the same expression I had worn for 22 years in my first life. But inside, every fiber of my being hummed with anticipation. In exactly 72 hours, when she presented her design to the panel of international judges, she would learn what I had spent 2 years of this second life preparing for her. The irony was exquisite. She thought she was stealing my future. She had no idea she was walking directly into her own destruction. The memories of my death still haunted me, even 2 years after my rebirth. I had been 24 then, working as a struggling assistant designer in a cramped studio apartment, watching helplessly as Melissa lived the life that should have been mine. She had graduated from Parsons, the school I should have attended if my father hadn't redirected my college fund to pay for her education instead. She had landed the job at Vera Wang that I had dreamed of since childhood. She had the career, the recognition, the life I had been denied. I had died alone in that apartment, collapsing from exhaustion and malnutrition after working 3 jobs to pay for my mother's cancer treatment. Treatment that my family could have easily afforded if they hadn't written me off years ago. The last thing I remembered was reaching for my sketchbook, trying to finish one final design before the darkness took me. Then I woke up on my 22nd birthday, 2 years in the past, gasping in my childhood bedroom with every memory intact. The abuse had been subtle but relentless. When I was 12, my father married Rebecca, bringing her daughter Melissa into our home. Melissa was everything I wasn't. Blonde where I was brunette, outgoing where I was reserved, naturally charming where I was awkwardly earnest. More importantly, she was 3 months younger than me, which somehow made her the baby who needed protection and special treatment. It started with small things. When we both wanted to take piano lessons, there was only budget for one, and Melissa got them because she showed more natural talent. When I won a regional art competition at 14, the celebration dinner became about Melissa's participation trophy in volleyball. When I was accepted to Parsons with a partial scholarship, suddenly there was a family financial crisis that required my college fund. But somehow, Melissa's education was never in question. The pattern was always the same. My achievements were minimized, my needs were secondary, my dreams were expendable. Rebecca positioned herself as the reasonable stepmother who tried to be fair, while my father gradually withdrew from me entirely. Melissa learned to weaponize their favoritism, playing the innocent victim whenever I tried to stand up for myself. But the cruelest cut came during my senior year of high school. I had spent months working on my portfolio for art school, pouring every ounce of creativity and hope into those designs. The night before my interview, I found Melissa in my room, photographing my sketches with her phone. "Just sharing your work with some friends," she had said with that practiced, innocent smile. "They're so impressed by your talent." 2 days later, I discovered she had submitted my 3 best designs to a local fashion contest under her own name. When I confronted her, she claimed I had given her permission to collaborate and that the ideas had grown from conversations we'd had together. My father and Rebecca believed her version, and I was grounded for trying to sabotage your sister's success out of jealousy. She won that contest. The prize was a full scholarship to a summer fashion program in Milan. My dreams, her opportunity. That was when I learned the hardest lesson of my first life. Talent means nothing without power, and I had none. In my second life, I was determined to change that equation. The supernatural advantage of rebirth had given me something far more valuable than magical powers or secret allies. It had given me perfect knowledge of the future. I knew every contest, every opportunity, every trend that would emerge over the next 2 years. More importantly, I knew exactly how Melissa operated. Every weakness in her carefully constructed facade, every lie she would tell, but I also knew that simply exposing her wouldn't be enough. In my first life, I had tried that approach and failed. This time, I needed to be smarter. I needed to think like her, to use manipulation and long term strategy instead of direct confrontation. And so I began to plan. The turning point came exactly 6 months after my rebirth, on the day I made the decision that would reshape everything. I was sitting in my bedroom, watching Melissa through the window as she lounged by the pool in the backyard, talking on the phone about some boy she was manipulating. The sight filled me with the familiar rage, but for the first time, I channeled that rage into something productive. I opened my laptop and began typing. First, I researched every major fashion competition that would take place over the next 18 months. I cross-referenced judges, criteria, and previous winning entries. I studied fashion trend forecasts and industry insider reports that wouldn't become public for months. Then I began creating my masterpiece, not a dress, but a trap. The Parsons Design Competition was the biggest opportunity of the year, with a panel of judges including representatives from major fashion houses and a grand prize that included a $50,000 scholarship and an internship at one of the top design firms in New York. In my first life, I had never even heard about it until after Melissa won it with designs she had stolen from other students. This time, I was going to hand her the victory she craved and ensure it destroyed her completely. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would create a design so stunning, so apparently perfect, that Melissa wouldn't be able to resist stealing it. But woven into every detail would be evidence of intellectual property theft, conceptual flaws that would only become apparent under professional scrutiny, and subtle signatures that would prove I was the original creator. I spent 3 months creating the design, a flowing evening gown that appeared to be inspired by Art Nouveau, with intricate beadwork that seemed to grow organically across the fabric like vines. On the surface, it was breathtaking, but every choice I made was calculated. The color scheme was based on a palette that I knew would be trending heavily in 18 months, but was completely unknown now, making it impossible for Melissa to explain how she had anticipated the trend. The beading pattern incorporated a technique that I had learned from a tutorial that wouldn't be published online for another year. Most damning of all, I embedded my initials in the embroidery pattern using a method so subtle that only someone looking for it would find it, but once found, it would be undeniable proof of authorship. I left the sketches where Melissa would find them, along with fabric samples and detailed construction notes. Then I waited. It took her exactly 3 days to take the bait. The next 8 months were a masterclass in patience and strategic thinking. I watched Melissa work with her design, helping her when she struggled with techniques she didn't understand, offering suggestions that would make the final product even more obviously beyond her skill level. I documented everything. Every time she asked for help, every technique I had to teach her, every moment where it became clear she didn't understand the theoretical foundation of what she was creating. Meanwhile, I began working on my real collection, the designs I would actually present when the time came. I used the knowledge from my previous life to create pieces that were commercially viable, technically innovative, and emotionally resonant. But I kept these hidden, working on them only when the house was empty, storing them in a safety deposit box I had opened with money from a part-time job. I also began building my arsenal of evidence. I installed a keylogger on the family computer that Melissa used, recording every search she made as she tried to research techniques she didn't understand. I set up hidden cameras in my room that would trigger when someone entered, capturing footage of her photographing my designs. I created detailed timestamps for every sketch, every fabric choice, every design decision, building an unshakable timeline that would prove my authorship. But most importantly, I began reaching out to people who would matter when the truth came out. I started a blog documenting my design process, subtly building an audience of fashion students and industry professionals. I volunteered at local fashion events, making connections with people who would remember my face and my work. I applied for internships and scholarships, creating a paper trail that established my legitimate credentials as a designer. I was no longer the isolated, powerless girl from my first life. I was building an identity that would be impossible to discredit. The most satisfying part was watching Melissa struggle with the technical aspects of construction. The dress I had designed required advanced pattern making skills that she didn't possess, couture techniques that she had never learned, and an understanding of fabric behavior that could only come from years of experience. Every week, she would come to me with problems, and I would help her solve them, all while documenting her ignorance for later use. "I'm having trouble with the bodice construction," she said one afternoon, standing in my doorway with a frustrated expression. "The darts aren't sitting right." I looked up from my homework with practiced innocence. "Are you using the princess seam method or the traditional dart method?" Her blank stare was all the answer I needed. The normal way?" "There are 3 different approaches to that particular construction challenge," I said patiently. "Each one creates a different silhouette and fit. Which effect are you trying to achieve?" She fidgeted with the fabric in her hands. "Just, the right one. The one that looks good." I spent the next hour teaching her techniques that any serious fashion student would have learned in their first semester, all while my hidden camera recorded every moment of her confusion. By the time she left my room, I had enough footage to create a highlight reel of her incompetence. As the deadline for the competition approached, Melissa's anxiety grew more obvious. She spent hours on the phone with her friends, alternately bragging about her amazing design and worrying about the presentation. She hired a professional seamstress to help with the final construction, claiming that her own hands were too precious to risk on the delicate work. She even tried to hire a coach to help her articulate her design philosophy during the presentation. Everything she did was another nail in her own coffin. The night before the competition, I watched her practice her presentation in the living room, wearing the dress she thought would make her famous. She looked stunning. The design really was beautiful, and despite everything, she wore it well. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Tell me again about your inspiration for the beadwork pattern," Rebecca coached from the couch, playing the role of a judge. Melissa launched into the explanation I had helped her memorize. "The pattern represents the organic growth of art in society, with each bead symbolizing a moment of creative inspiration that builds upon the previous one. The spiral motif references the golden ratio found in nature, while the color progression represents the evolution of artistic consciousness." It was beautiful bullshit, and she delivered it with complete confidence. She had no idea that every word was a trap. The organic growth pattern was actually based on a mathematical formula that I had learned in an advanced textile design course that wouldn't be offered at our school for another year. The spiral motif incorporated a specific technique that had been developed by a designer who wouldn't publish his methods until next month. And the color progression required knowledge of color theory that she demonstrably didn't possess. "That's lovely, sweetheart," Rebecca said with pride. "You're going to do wonderfully tomorrow." I excused myself and went to my room, where I made final preparations for my own presentation. I had been accepted to present my real collection the following week at a smaller, more intimate showcase that focused on emerging designers. It would be attended by many of the same judges, but with a fraction of the publicity. That was exactly what I wanted. When Melissa fell, I wanted the design world to remember exactly who was standing in the wings. I spent the evening reviewing my evidence file one last time. I had timeline documentation proving I had developed the design months before Melissa created it. I had video footage of her stealing my sketches and asking for help with techniques she didn't understand. I had computer records showing her desperate late-night searches for information about methods she claimed to have developed herself. I had testimony from the seamstress she had hired who would confirm that Melissa didn't know basic construction principles. Most damning of all, I had the original sketches with my signature, my handwriting, and my creative process documented in detail. But the final trap was something even more personal. Embedded in the beadwork, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look, was a message in Morse code that spelled out, "I will rise." I had put it there as a reminder to myself during the dark months of planning, but now it would serve as undeniable proof of authorship. The dress was perfect bait because it represented everything Melissa valued most: external beauty, immediate gratification, and the appearance of sophistication without the substance to back it up. She had taken it because she couldn't resist the chance to claim credit for something spectacular. Tomorrow, she would learn the price of that greed. The morning of the competition, I woke up before dawn and drove to the venue 3 hours early. I had told my family I was volunteering as an usher, which gave me access to the building and let me observe everything that would happen without drawing attention to myself. The competition was being held at the Fashion Institute of Technology in their main auditorium. Designers had 2 hours to set up their displays, followed by individual presentations to the panel of judges. The presentations were open to the public, which meant the room would be filled with fashion students, industry professionals, and media representatives. Perfect for what I had planned. I watched Melissa arrive with Rebecca and my father, all of them buzzing with nervous excitement. Melissa looked confident in her designer outfit, a look she had copied from a magazine editorial that wouldn't be published for another month. Even her styling was unoriginal. She set up her display with practiced efficiency, arranging her dress on a custom mannequin and positioning her portfolio boards to show off her design process. I had to admit, the presentation looked professional. Rebecca had clearly hired someone to help with the visual design, but presentation skills wouldn't save her from what was coming. I took my seat in the back of the auditorium and waited for her time slot. She was scheduled to present 5th out of 12 designers, which meant she would have enough time to build confidence before the acts fell. The first 4 presentations went smoothly. I recognized 2 of the designers from my research. Both were genuinely talented students who deserved to be there. Their work was impressive, their presentations polished, their design philosophies authentic. Then it was Melissa's turn. She walked onto the stage with perfect posture and a radiant smile, every inch the confident designer. The dress looked even more stunning under the professional lighting, and I heard several appreciative murmurs from the audience. She positioned herself next to her display and began her presentation with practiced charm. Good morning, distinguished judges and fellow designers. My name is Melissa Hartford, and I'm here to present Metamorphosis, a gown that explores the intersection of natural growth patterns and human creativity. She launched into the explanation I had helped her memorize, and for the first few minutes, everything went perfectly. She described her inspiration, her design process, and her construction techniques with apparent authority. The judges nodded appreciatively, and I could see Rebecca beaming with pride in the audience. Then Dr. Patricia Nolan, head of fashion design at Parsons, asked the first real question. Miss Hartford, your beadwork pattern is quite sophisticated. Can you walk us through your mathematical approach to the spiral progression? Melissa's smile faltered for just a moment. Mathematical approach? Yes, the pattern clearly incorporates advanced geometric principles. I'm curious about your background in mathematical design theory. I watched Melissa's face as she realized she was about to be exposed as a fraud. She had memorized the description I had given her, but she had no understanding of the underlying concepts. She couldn't explain something she didn't understand. Well, she said carefully, I approached it more from an intuitive perspective. I wanted the mathematics to feel organic rather than calculated. Dr. Nolan's expression sharpened. I see, and the color progression, it's quite unusual to see such a sophisticated understanding of chromatic theory in a student work. Where did you develop this expertise? Another question Melissa couldn't answer. The color theory I had used was graduate-level material that I had learned from online courses that wouldn't be available for months. There was no way she could explain how she had acquired that knowledge. I've always been interested in color, she said weakly. I study it independently. Fascinating. And this construction technique for the bodice? It's quite advanced. Did you develop this method yourself? Now Melissa was sweating. Yes, through experimentation. Dr. Nolan exchanged a glance with the other judges. I could see the suspicion growing on their faces. They were experts in their field, and they recognized work that was beyond a student's capabilities when they saw it, but the real trap was still to come. Miss Hartford, said James Chen, creative director at a major fashion house, there's something quite remarkable about your design that I'd like to discuss. Are you familiar with the concept of hidden signatures in fashion design? Melissa looked confused. Hidden signatures? It's a technique where designers embed their initials or other identifying marks into their work using subtle design elements. It's often used to establish ownership or to create a personal connection with the piece. I held my breath. This was the moment I had been planning for 2 years. Your beadwork contains what appears to be a coded message. Were you aware of this? Melissa's face went completely white. A coded message? James Chen walked over to her display and pointed to a specific section of the beadwork. Right here, embedded in the pattern. When you map the bead placement to Morse code, it spells out, "I will rise." It's quite cleverly hidden. You'd have to know exactly where to look to find it. The auditorium went dead silent. Melissa stared at the dress as if it had betrayed her, which, in a sense, it had. I I didn't, she stammered. You didn't know about the message in your own design? Dr. Nolan's voice was ice cold. That's quite remarkable considering how precisely it's executed. It would require extraordinary planning to embed such a message while maintaining the aesthetic integrity of the overall pattern. I watched Melissa's world collapse in real time. She looked desperately around the room, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Her eyes found mine in the audience, and for a moment, understanding flickered across her face. She finally understood what had happened to her. But it was too late. Furthermore, James Chen continued, the initials C.H appear to be woven into the base of the spirals using thread that's slightly darker than the surrounding fabric. Can you explain the significance of those initials? Charlotte Hartwell, my initials. My real name, not the family name I had been forced to adopt when my father remarried. Melissa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air. Miss Hartford, Dr. Nolan said formally, given these irregularities, I think we need to pause your presentation for a moment. Can you provide documentation of your design process? Original sketches, perhaps, or photos of your work in progress? Melissa's hands shook as she fumbled with her portfolio. I knew what she would find there, the carefully curated selection of sketches and progress photos that showed the dress in various stages of completion, but which were completely inconsistent with the story she had just told about her design process. Meanwhile, I quietly slipped out of the auditorium and made my way to the registration desk, where I asked to speak with the competition coordinator. It was time to reveal my hand. Excuse me, I said to the organizer, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard. I'm Charlotte Hartwell, and I need to report a case of intellectual property theft. Her head snapped up. I'm sorry, what? The design being presented by Melissa Hartford is stolen from me. I have extensive documentation proving that I'm the original creator. The woman's eyes widened. Are you serious? I handed her a flash drive containing my evidence file. Video footage of the theft, timestamp design documentation, and computer records showing her research into techniques she claims to have developed herself. Everything you need to verify my claims. She called for security and the head judge, and within 10 minutes I was standing in a conference room with the entire judging panel, laying out my case with the methodical precision of a prosecutor. I showed them the hidden camera footage of Melissa photographing my sketches. I demonstrated the timeline proving I had developed the design months before she claimed to have created it. I walked them through the computer logs, showing her desperate searches for information about techniques she supposedly knew by heart. But the most damning evidence was the simplest. I showed them my original sketches, complete with my signature, my handwriting, and detailed notes about my creative process that matched perfectly with the finished garment. This is extraordinary, Dr. Nolan said, studying the evidence. The level of premeditation involved in this theft is remarkable. She's done this before, I said quietly. She's been stealing my work for years. This time, I was ready for her. They asked me to wait in the conference room while they dealt with Melissa. Through the window, I could see her being escorted from the building by security, with Rebecca and my father following behind in obvious confusion and distress. 20 minutes later, Dr. Nolan returned with an unexpected proposal. Miss Hartwell, she said, we'd like to offer you the opportunity to present your real work to the judges. We understand this is short notice, but given the circumstances... I smiled. Actually, I have a presentation scheduled for next week at the Emerging Designers Showcase. I'd be honored if you could attend. She looked surprised. You have other work prepared? I've been working on a full collection for the past 18 months, I said. The stolen design was just a test piece, not representative of my real capabilities. The irony was perfect. Melissa had stolen what she thought was my best work, not realizing it was just the bait in a trap designed specifically for her. The judges agreed to attend my showcase the following week, and Dr. Nolan handed me a business card. I think you'll find we're very interested in discussing your future at Parsons. The scholarship that should have gone to Melissa would be mine instead. But that was just the beginning. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By the end of the day, word of Melissa's disgrace had spread through the fashion community like wildfire. The story had everything: family betrayal, stolen designs, and a dramatic public exposure. Fashion blogs picked it up immediately, and by evening it was trending on social media. Melissa's reputation was destroyed overnight. The fashion world is small and unforgiving, and nobody would ever trust her with an original design again. The part-time modeling gigs she had booked were canceled. The internship she had lined up for the summer disappeared. Her social media accounts, once filled with aspirational fashion content, became a graveyard of deleted posts and turned off comments. But the personal consequences were even more satisfying. Rebecca, faced with undeniable evidence of her daughter's systematic theft and lies, finally had to confront the reality of who Melissa really was. The golden child she had protected and favored for years was revealed as a fraud who had built her entire identity on stolen work. My father, meanwhile, was forced to acknowledge that he had systematically ignored and undervalued his own daughter in favor of a stepchild who had been manipulating the family for years. The college fund he had redirected to Melissa's education, money that had paid for her to learn techniques she would use to steal from me, was revealed as an investment in a lie. The family dinner 3 days after the competition was a masterpiece of uncomfortable silence and barely suppressed rage. Melissa sat hunched over her plate, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Rebecca picked at her food while shooting furtive glances at her daughter. My father kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, Rebecca broke the silence. "Charlotte, I think we owe you an apology." I looked up from my meal with practiced innocence. "For what?" For not seeing what was happening. For not protecting your work. She struggled to find words that wouldn't completely condemn her daughter. "For not being fair to you." It was a pathetic apology, but it was more than I had ever received in my first life. In that timeline, I had died without ever hearing them acknowledge my worth or their mistakes. "I appreciate that," I said calmly. "But I think the real issue isn't what happened to me. It's what this reveals about Melissa." All eyes turned to my stepsister, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "She's been stealing from me for years," I continued. "This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. It was a pattern of deliberate theft and manipulation. The question is, what else has she lied about?" That question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Once you realize someone has been systematically lying to you, every interaction becomes suspect. Every achievement becomes questionable. Every moment of trust becomes a potential deception. Over the following weeks, the family began to unravel Melissa's web of lies. They discovered that the Milan scholarship she had won in high school was based on stolen designs. They found evidence that she had cheated on multiple exams throughout college. They learned that the internship she had bragged about was secured through connections she had made by claiming credit for other people's work. My stepsister wasn't just a thief, she was a complete fraud who had built her entire life on other people's accomplishments. The reckoning was swift and comprehensive. Rebecca, faced with the undeniable evidence of her daughter's character, fell into a deep depression that required professional help. She had built her identity around being the mother of a talented, successful daughter, and discovering that Melissa was actually a parasitic fraud shattered her sense of self. My father, meanwhile, threw himself into trying to make amends with me. He offered to pay for my entire education at Parsons to fund my first fashion line, to make up for years of neglect and favoritism. But I could see the guilt eating at him. He knew that his daughter had died alone and struggling in another timeline because of his choices. And even though he didn't remember that life, the emotional truth of his failure hung over him like a shadow. As for Melissa herself, she retreated into complete isolation. She dropped out of school, stopped seeing her friends, and spent most of her time locked in her room. The confident, manipulative young woman who had stolen my future was replaced by a broken shell who couldn't face the world she had tried to conquer through deception. But my victory wasn't complete yet. There was still one more move to make. My presentation at the Emerging Designers Showcase was a triumph beyond anything I had imagined. The collection I unveiled, 5 pieces that demonstrated technical mastery, commercial viability, and genuine artistic vision, earned a standing ovation from an audience that included some of the most influential figures in fashion. Dr. Nolan didn't just offer me admission to Parsons, she offered me a full scholarship and a position as a teaching assistant. James Chen approached me after the show with an internship offer that would normally go to graduate students. 3 different fashion magazines wanted to feature my work in upcoming issues. But the most satisfying moment came when I spotted a familiar figure lurking in the back of the venue during my presentation. Melissa had somehow managed to get into the showcase, probably hoping to steal more ideas or gather intelligence about my real capabilities. Instead, she got to watch me claim the spotlight that should have been hers all along. After the presentation, I found her waiting by the exit, looking lost and desperate. "Charlotte," she said quietly, "we need to talk." I stopped and studied her face. The confident manipulation I had known for years was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. About what? About everything, about what I did, about how I can make it right. I almost laughed. Make it right? Melissa, you've been stealing from me for years. You built your entire identity on my work. You convinced our parents that I was worthless while you claimed credit for my achievements. What exactly do you think you can do to make that right? She fidgeted with her purse, unable to meet my eyes. I could tell people the truth. I could confess publicly. I could give you credit for everything I stole. You think I need your confession now? I gestured toward the venue behind us, where people were still talking about my collection. I think I've proven my worth without your help. Then what do you want from me? She asked. And for the first time in my life, I heard genuine desperation in her voice. I considered the question seriously. What did I want from her? In my first life, I had wanted acknowledgement, apology, and justice. In this life, I had already achieved all 3. She was ruined, discredited, and facing a future where every door that had once been open to her was now permanently closed. I want you to understand something, I said finally. Everything you are, everything you've achieved, everything you thought made you special, it was all built on lies. You have no talent, no vision, no genuine ability. You're a parasite who got by on theft and manipulation. And now that everyone knows what you really are, you have nothing left. Her face crumpled and I could see tears forming in her eyes. But here's the thing, Melissa. I don't need you to be miserable. I don't need you to suffer. I just need you to be irrelevant. You've taken enough of my energy over the years. I'm not going to waste any more time thinking about you. I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Melissa? The dress you stole? I designed it specifically to destroy you. Every detail, every technique, every element that seemed too sophisticated for you, it was all intentional. I spent 2 years building a trap, and you walked right into it because you couldn't resist stealing something that looked impressive. Understanding dawned on her face, the full realization of how completely she had been outmaneuvered. The message in the beadwork, the initials, the advanced techniques you couldn't explain, it was all evidence. I didn't just catch you stealing, I made sure you stole something that would destroy you when you tried to claim it, and I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You taught me that talent means nothing without power. I just learned to be smarter about acquiring power than you were. I walked away and left her standing alone in the parking lot, finally understanding the true cost of her years of theft and manipulation. 6 months later, I was thriving at Parsons, working with professors who respected my talent and challenged me to grow. I had an internship lined up at a prestigious fashion house, a growing network of industry connections, and designs that were getting attention from buyers and critics alike. Melissa, meanwhile, had moved back in with her biological father in another state, working retail at a department store and taking community college classes in business administration. Her fashion dreams were permanently dead, killed by her own greed and dishonesty. Rebecca and my father had divorced quietly, unable to rebuild their marriage after the destruction of their blended family. Rebecca moved to Florida to be closer to her sister, taking her broken dreams and her broken daughter with her. My father sold the house where I'd grown up and moved into a smaller place, as if trying to escape the memories of his failures as a parent. But I thrived in ways that went beyond professional success. The experience of planning and executing my revenge had taught me valuable lessons about strategy, patience, and the power of long-term thinking. I applied those lessons to every aspect of my life, building a career and a future that was entirely my own creation. I also learned something important about justice. In my first life, I had been a victim who died hoping for acknowledgement that never came. In my second life, I became an architect of my own vindication. The difference wasn't just in the supernatural advantage of rebirth, it was in my willingness to think strategically, to plan carefully, and to execute flawlessly. Melissa had taught me that the world doesn't reward talent or effort automatically, but she had also, inadvertently, taught me how to fight for what I deserved using her own weapons against her. The final irony was perfect. She had created her own destroyer by showing me exactly how to be ruthless in pursuit of my goals. Years later, when I was established in my career and my name was known throughout the fashion world, a journalist asked me about the incident that had launched my success. They wanted to know how it felt to expose someone who had stolen from me so systematically. It felt like justice, I said simply. But more than that, it felt like taking control of my own story for the first time in my life. I never mentioned the rebirth, the supernatural second chance that had made my revenge possible. That secret was mine alone. But I didn't need to explain the impossible to make the lesson clear. Sometimes the only way to win is to refuse to keep playing by rules that were designed to make you lose. Melissa had built her life on theft and manipulation, counting on my passivity and the family's blindness to protect her from consequences. She never imagined that her victim might learn to think like a predator, to plan like a strategist, and to strike back with precision and devastating effectiveness.
But
By the time she realized what was happening to her, the trap had already closed. And by the time she understood the full scope of what I had done, it was far too late to save herself. I had risen from death itself to claim the life that should have been mine all along. In the end, that was a victory worth waiting 2 lifetimes to achieve. The girl who had once been powerless and voiceless had become a woman who shaped her own destiny, and no one would ever steal from me again.